Ethan Cole stood at the back of the chapel, his hands clenched into fists so tight his nails dug half-moons into his palms. 56 chairs had been arranged for Alessandro Varelli's funeral, one for every key figure in the family, the business, the legacy. 55 were filled. The last, beside Celine, his wife of 8 years, sat empty on purpose. She'd blocked it with her handbag, her sharp whisper still echoing in his mind. "You can stand at the back, Ethan." He had driven Alessandro to doctor's appointments, sat through his chemo sessions, listened to his stories, while Celine jetted to galas with Core Wild on her arm, disguised as her best friend. Now she stood in front of the mourners, weeping on command, praising her father's greatness, not once acknowledging the man who had been there for him in the final days. Ethan's heart pounded with the burn of humiliation and betrayal. And as he watched her dab her eyes and thank the crowd, his phone buzzed with the message that would change everything. "Reading of the will tomorrow. Your attendance required." The fault line in Ethan's life was about to split wide open. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from all over the world. Your comments create a community where storytelling thrives, and we're so grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and prepare for a journey that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Let's get started. Ethan Cole stood at the back of the chapel, watching the woman he'd called his wife for 8 years glide up to the pulpit in front of 100 solemn faces. Celine Varelli looked perfect under the soft lights, her black dress sculpted to her body, blonde hair swept into a flawless chignon, a single diamond teardrop glinting on her ear. But what caught Ethan's eye wasn't her beauty. It was the empty chair next to her. Chair 56, the one meant for him. She had claimed every other seat for family and close friends. Alessandro Varelli's business partners, high-profile charity heads, distant cousins flown in from Europe. The chair beside her had been barricaded with her handbag, a silent surgical exclusion. No scene, no announcement, just a clear message. "You can stand at the back, Ethan." She'd whispered it 20 minutes before the service, her voice a polished blade wrapped in silk. And so, while Celine stood in front of their world and wept for her father, Ethan remained in the shadows, near the towering floral arrangements and the staff, watching a life he had built crumble in real time. He should have known this was coming. He had driven Alessandro to every doctor's appointment when Celine was too busy at fashion weeks in Paris and private galas in Capri. He had installed railings in the old man's bathroom, learned the exact way Alessandro liked his coffee, and sat with him for hours, listening to stories of Italy, of family, of business, of betrayal. And yet, here he was, excluded. Celine's eulogy flowed like a symphony. Stories of Alessandro's genius, his generosity, his charitable spirit, his love for family. She spoke of how much he loved his daughter. She spoke of everything, except Ethan. Not once did she mention the man who had been by her father's side when she wasn't. Around him, mourners sniffled into silk handkerchiefs, dabbed at their eyes, nodded at Celine with admiration. To them, she was the perfect grieving daughter, embodying poise, grace, and heartbreak. To Ethan, she was a stranger. The funeral director shot Ethan a look of sympathy from across the room, but protocol demanded silence. Celine had taken control of the narrative. The Varelli name, the Varelli legacy, the Varelli public image, it all belonged to her. When the final hymn ended and people rose to their feet, Ethan waited, letting the crowd filter toward the family reception. He didn't want to stand in Celine's glow, to be the invisible man in the photos she would curate for social media. He wanted to leave. But something stopped him. As the mourners moved, he saw Celine turn, radiant and smiling through delicate tears, accepting condolences. A man brushed his hand along her arm, their lawyer, Hartwell, and murmured something. Celine nodded, then laughed softly, the kind of laugh Ethan knew was calibrated to make people feel chosen, special. She held her phone loosely in one hand, already checking messages. Ethan approached quietly. "Celine," he said, his voice low. She turned, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before she morphed it into a look of polite surprise. "Oh, Ethan. I didn't know you were still here. I've been here the whole time. Yes, well, the family section was quite full." She slipped her phone into her purse, careful to keep a small, official-looking envelope tucked inside from spilling out. Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew that envelope. Alessandro's will. "I understand," Ethan said quietly. For a split second, her mask faltered. The woman he'd once known flickered through, the sharp, ambitious Celine who saw life as a chessboard and never played to lose. "I have arrangements to handle," she murmured, recovering smoothly. "I'll see you at home." "I don't think you will." She froze, but only for a moment. "We'll talk later." Ethan watched her disappear into the crowd, her black heels clicking softly against the marble floor, already immersed in whispered conversations, already rewriting history. That night, Ethan stood in the doorway of their master bedroom, watching Celine through a crack in the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to her ear, silk robe slipping off one shoulder. Her voice was low, intimate, laced with amusement. "I don't need his permission to open my marriage," she purred, laughing softly. "You know I'm an attractive woman, honey. I always get what I want. If he steps out of line, I'll just boot him out." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just the words. It was the casual cruelty in her voice, the way she dismissed him as if he were nothing more than an obstacle, a piece of furniture she was ready to sell off. He shifted slightly, the floor creaking under his foot. Celine turned, their eyes locked. For a heartbeat, she froze, truly froze, for the first time in years. The color drained from her face, her mouth opened slightly, a flash of something raw and unmasked breaking through. Then she saw what he was holding. A sealed envelope, thick, official, Alessandro's signature scrawled across the back. Her lips parted. "Please," she whispered, her voice small, crumbling. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't need to. He turned and walked out. He sat alone in Alessandro's study, the envelope resting on his lap. The house was silent, save for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The walls were lined with heavy books, awards, photographs of a man both larger than life and heartbreakingly human. Ethan ran his thumb along the envelope's edge. This wasn't just a will. This was a last word, a final deliberate act from a man who had seen more than he let on. His phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Hartwell. "Reading of the will, tomorrow. Your attendance required." Ethan leaned back in the leather chair, exhaling slowly, feeling the weight of years pressed down on his chest. Not just the weight of the marriage, but the weight of realizing just how long he'd been alone. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been a slow erosion, a hollowing out of love, trust, and dignity, until all that was left was a man standing at the back of his own life, watching his wife rewrite his story without him. But not anymore. The envelope sat heavy in his hands, a promise, a warning, a reckoning. And Ethan Cole, for the first time in 8 years, felt something sharp and unfamiliar stir in his chest. Resolve. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from all over the world. Your comments create a community where storytelling thrives, and we're so grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Now settle in, get comfortable, and prepare for a journey that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Let's get started. The conference room at Hartwell Associates was a temple to money. Glass walls, polished stone floors, a custom walnut table that stretched almost the length of the room, and chairs so buttery soft they could lull you into thinking you belonged there, if you didn't know better. Ethan Cole sat at the far end, alone. At the opposite end, Celine Varelli crossed one long leg over the other, a picture of poise in a black Armani suit. Her eyes were rimmed in just the right amount of redness, her hair swept into a smooth bun, her fingers resting lightly on her leather clutch. Beside her sat Cor Wilde, his creative partner. At least, that's how the media liked to spin it. He wore a slim-fit navy jacket, his perfectly tousled hair shimmering under the recessed lights, an uneasy smile tugging at his mouth as he scrolled his phone. Ethan watched them in silence. The door opened, and in came Richard Hartwell, the senior partner, thin-framed glasses, steel-gray hair, and the kind of crisp presence that said he'd been around old money long enough to act like it didn't impress him anymore. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," Hartwell said, settling into his seat and sliding a thick document onto the table. "We're here to execute the last will and testament of Alessandro Varelli, as per his explicit instructions." Celine shifted forward slightly, folding her hands in a show of composed anticipation. Cor tilted his head, watching like a man eager for good news. Ethan sat perfectly still. Hartwell began. "To my beloved daughter Celine, I leave the sum of $1 million, along with my hope she will find fulfillment and strength in her own accomplishments." The room stilled. Celine's smile faltered. Cor's fingers, drumming lightly on the table, froze. Celine's eyes darted to Hartwell, then to Ethan, then back to Hartwell. Ethan exhaled quietly, heart thudding. Hartwell continued, voice steady. "The remainder of my estate, including all real estate holdings, business shares, investment portfolios, and personal assets, I leave to my son-in-law, Ethan Cole, in gratitude for his loyalty, kindness, and integrity." There was a sound like a crack in the air. Celine flinched. Cor stiffened, his mouth opening slightly before snapping shut. Ethan felt his ears ringing, like the world had pressed pause. He had expected to be left nothing, not because he wanted Alessandro's fortune, but because Celine had worked for years to erase him from the family's center. And now, with a single sentence, everything had shifted. Hartwell's voice softened. "There's also a private letter, Mr. Cole, which Mr. Varelli instructed me to give you personally." Back in the privacy of Alessandro's study, Ethan sat in the deep leather armchair, turning the sealed envelope over in his hands. The old man's handwriting, bold, slanting, impatient, was scrawled across the front. For Ethan. He opened it carefully. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then Celine has already tried to destroy you. She only knows how to feed you crumbs. Don't let her leash you again. I saw how you treated me, how you showed up when she wouldn't. This is my last gift to you, freedom. Be wise, be strong, and don't let her pull you back in, Alessandro." Ethan stared at the words, his throat tightening. He hadn't realized how badly he'd needed to hear them, how long he'd been gaslit into thinking his place in the family had been conditional, fragile, one wrong move away from disappearing. But Alessandro had seen him, and he hadn't been blind to his daughter's nature. That night, Celine slipped into Ethan's room. She wore silk, of course she did, and smelled faintly of the expensive jasmine lotion she applied before bed. Her voice was soft, her expression carefully composed, eyes wide, lips trembling just enough. "Baby, I know this is a shock. For both of us. I've been under so much pressure. Grief does things to people, doesn't it?" Ethan watched her from across the room. "We can fix this, you know," Celine whispered, stepping closer, sliding her arms around his neck. You and me. We're a team. He could feel her breath against his skin, the practiced, precise seduction she'd used so many times to get what she wanted. His hands remained at his sides. On the nightstand, Celine's phone buzzed. Ethan's eyes flicked to the screen. A message preview flashed. Don't worry, honey. We'll untangle this. He's soft. Always was. Core. Celine's arms tightened briefly around him. Ethan's stomach turned. When she left the room, Ethan returned to Alessandro's study. He reached for the folder Hartwell had given him. A second file, marked private. Inside were surveillance stills, pharmacy invoices, and bank transfers. Celine visiting Alessandro's private suite at strange hours. Medications purchased in cash, never prescribed. Large sums wired to Core's fashion company in the weeks before Alessandro's final hospitalization. The pattern emerged with a sickening clarity. It wasn't just that Celine and Core had plotted to rewrite Alessandro's will. It was that Alessandro had suspected his own daughter of trying to end his life early. Ethan sat back, hands pressed to his face, heart racing. The betrayal he thought he'd already processed opened into something deeper, darker, and more lethal. The next morning, an envelope appeared under his door. You're getting close. Meet me. M.H. The note led him to a rooftop bar downtown, a place with steel beams, glass walls, and a sweeping view of Los Angeles. At a corner table waited Marcus Hale, Alessandro's longtime private investigator. Marcus was broad-shouldered, early 50s, dressed like someone who understood both money and the streets. He nodded as Ethan approached. Sit. Ethan sat. Alessandro hired me a year ago. He was worried. Celine was getting bolder. Core was bleeding her dry. And you, Marcus smiled faintly. You were the one decent person left in the house. He slid a folder across the table. She was paying Core off to keep him quiet. But he wasn't loyal to her. We intercepted his texts. Ethan opened the file. Screenshots. Celine's desperate, playing the good wife on one hand, bankrolling me on the other. She thinks I'll stay after the money hits, as if. Once the will's ours, she's out. Ethan felt cold creep up his spine. I figured you should know, Marcus murmured, before she tries her next move. That night, Ethan found Celine in the master suite. She was lounging on the bed, glass of wine in hand, long legs crossed, the very picture of nonchalant seduction. Baby, can we please stop this? She murmured, patting the space beside her. Ethan dropped the folder onto the bed. She froze. As she flipped through the photos, receipts, and texts, the color drained from her face. I gave you everything, she hissed suddenly, her voice twisting. You were nobody before me. You'd still be patching drywall in Chicago if it weren't for me. Downstairs, the front door clicked. Ethan glanced out the window. Core was sliding into a black car, suitcase in hand, paparazzi already swarming. But he wasn't with Celine. He was with a young male model, his newest prize. Celine turned back to Ethan, eyes wild. This isn't over, she spat. You think you can walk away from me? From this family? From everything we built? Ethan exhaled slowly. We didn't build anything, he said softly. I was just holding the walls up. Celine's breath hitched. You'll regret this. Maybe, Ethan murmured. But not tonight. The next morning, Ethan's attorney called. Core flipped. Ethan closed his eyes. He's handing everything over to prosecutors. Celine's finished. And just like that, the woman who had orchestrated her father's death, her husband's humiliation, and her lover's enrichment, found herself alone, exposed, and cornered. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt the weight on his chest lift. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was the start of something far rarer. Freedom. The media storm hit faster than Ethan Cole had imagined. He woke the next morning to a vibrating phone and a wall of notifications lighting up the screen. Texts, missed calls, breaking news banners. Alessandro Virelli's will had leaked, or, more precisely, someone had made sure it leaked. Billionaire leaves $200 million estate to son-in-law. Heiress daughter receives $1 million. Virelli family. Shock, power shift in Bel Air. Within hours, photographers clustered at the gates of the estate, their long lenses aimed like rifles. Celine's publicist released a brief statement. Mrs. Virelli is mourning the loss of her beloved father and requests privacy during this time of grief. It was a lie. Because upstairs, Celine Virelli was no longer grieving. She was calculating. Ethan stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee with a hand that barely shook. The house was unnaturally quiet. The staff had called out. The phones had stopped ringing. Even the walls, it seemed, were holding their breath. He heard the sharp click of heels on the marble floor. Celine entered, dressed in soft cream silk, no makeup, hair loose, the picture of raw vulnerability. She moved toward him slowly, like a dancer finding her mark. "Ethan," she murmured, "I think we should talk." He set the coffee cup down. "We should." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Celine's lip quivered, a detail Ethan once would have rushed to comfort, but now only watched with detached curiosity. "I know I've made mistakes," she whispered. I was overwhelmed by Dad, by the business, by everything. But we can fix this." She stepped closer, fingers brushing his forearm. "We have to fix this." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Celine." Her eyes darted up to his. "I know about Core." The flicker of panic in her pupils was microscopic, but he saw it. "I know about the money," Ethan continued softly. "The pharmacy receipts, the night visits, the will changes you tried to push through." Celine's mouth opened, then closed. "Ethan, listen. You weren't alone in this, but you weren't the only one running a long game." For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. Then Celine laughed softly, a jagged, brittle sound. "You really think you're going to come out of this as the hero?" she hissed. "You think people are going to look at you and see anything but a gold digger who got lucky?" She leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "I made you. Remember that." Ethan looked at her, really looked, and wondered how long ago this person had become a stranger. Later that afternoon, Ethan met Marcus Hale at the rooftop bar where they'd first spoken. Marcus handed him a new folder. "Core's flipping." Ethan exhaled. "What does that mean?" "It means he's already handed over chat records, emails, and payment trails to the DA's office. Celine's lawyers are scrambling. She's about to get hit with charges for conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse." Ethan stared out at the Los Angeles skyline, the sun low and sharp over the buildings. "What about Core?" Marcus gave a dry smile. "He walks, immunity deal, but his career's done. Every sponsorship, every deal, every show, they're pulling out." "Public's not kind to a man who plays both sides and burns them all." Ethan felt something tight in his chest loosen, just slightly. "What do I do now?" Marcus clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. Now you sit tight. The storm's coming for them, not for you." By evening, the first subpoenas landed. Celine's face turned pale when her lawyer called. She slammed the phone down, stalked into Ethan's office, and threw the papers onto his desk. "Happy now?" she snapped. "You've ruined me." Ethan didn't rise from his chair. "You did that yourself." Celine let out a harsh laugh, pacing. "Do you know what it's like to have people whisper about you, to have your name dragged through the dirt, to have everything you built ripped away?" He met her gaze, steady and calm. Yes. For the first time, Celine faltered. I'm not going down like this, she said quietly. I'll fight. You can, Ethan said softly. But you're alone now. And that, more than anything, seemed to crack something in her. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Celine's legal team, sharp-suited, high-priced, desperate. On the other, Cor Wilde, sitting with arms crossed, exuding a brittle kind of confidence. Ethan sat at the back. He hadn't wanted to testify, but his presence was enough. The story had become too big to ignore. When Cor took the stand, the room seemed to lean forward. We were together, Cor admitted, his voice smooth, practiced. Celine and I, financially, emotionally. We were planning to take control of the estate. Alessandro was old, distracted. We thought... He gave a tight smile. We thought we'd win. Celine shot up from her chair. You lying bastard, she shouted, finger shaking at him. You used me! The judge banged the gavel. Mrs. Varelli, sit down. Celine collapsed into her chair, hands trembling. Cor didn't even look at her. Outside, protesters lined the courthouse steps, not for Celine, not for Ethan, but for Cor. LGBTQ+ groups who once championed him now condemned him as a fraud, a manipulator, a man who used his identity as both shield and weapon. Inside, the walls of power were crumbling. The media's shift was brutal. Headlines turned, Celine Varelli, the fall of an heiress. Cor Wilde exposed, fashion's false savior. Ethan Cole, the quiet survivor. Talk shows dissected every angle. Online threads blew up with speculation. Paparazzi caught Cor sneaking out of clubs, disheveled, clinging to relevance. They caught Celine slipping into court-mandated meetings, pale and hollow-eyed. Ethan, he stayed home. He walked the halls of Alessandro's mansion, now his. He poured money into the foundation Alessandro had always dreamed of expanding, scholarships, grants, animal rescues. And when the public asked for comment, Ethan said one thing: no more statements. I'm moving forward. One night, Marcus Hale came by, hands in his coat pockets, expression thoughtful. You know, he said, settling into one of Alessandro's old leather chairs, I've worked a lot of cases, people tearing each other apart over money, over power. You're one of the only ones I've seen come out of it not wanting to burn the whole thing down. Ethan gave a tired smile. I thought about it. Marcus laughed softly. Yeah, but you didn't. They sat in quiet. For what it's worth, Marcus added, Alessandro knew she'd come for you. That's why he did this. Ethan nodded, throat tight. Yeah, I know. The night before the final court hearing, Ethan stood alone on the balcony, looking out at the darkened hills. Hope, the old greyhound Alessandro had adored, lay curled at his feet. Ethan reached down, stroking the soft fur, feeling the weight of the months, the years, press against his chest. He thought about Celine, somewhere across town, plotting or unraveling or maybe both. He thought about Cor, chasing cameras and slipping from their grip. And then, finally, he let himself think about himself, the man who had stood at the back of the funeral, invisible, humiliated, and had somehow survived. We're still here, he murmured to Hope. The old dog thumped her tail softly, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Ethan allowed himself a quiet, small smile. Not victory, not revenge, but survival. And maybe, just maybe, something better waiting on the other side. The morning after Cor Wilde took the stand, the media was merciless. Every outlet had latched onto the story like sharks smelling blood. Headlines screamed from every corner. Heiress Celine Varelli, Implodes in courtroom showdown. Core Wild's immunity deal, inside the betrayal. Quiet winner. Ethan Cole keeps dignity amid chaos. News trucks clogged the street outside Alessandro Virelli's mansion. Drones hovered near the property line, their soft buzzing blending into the low rumble of the city below. Ethan Cole stood at the window, watching it all unfold from behind the safety of the glass. He wasn't surprised. This was the moment Celine had feared, the moment Core had craved, and the moment Ethan himself, despite everything, had dreaded. Because it meant the destruction of a woman he had once loved, and the public spectacle of her fall. Inside the house, Celine was unraveling. She stormed through the marble hallways, shouting into her phone. "What do you mean he's untouchable? What do you mean the DA's office cut a deal? What do you mean the board is voting me out?" Her voice was sharp, splintered, frantic. Her image, once perfectly polished, was cracking in real time. Ethan stayed out of her way. When she spotted him, though, she made a beeline. "You think you've won?" she snapped, breath ragged. "You think standing there looking noble makes you the better person?" Ethan looked at her quietly. "I don't think anything," he said softly. "That's the difference between us." Her eyes narrowed, chest heaving, hands trembling at her sides. For a moment, it looked like she might slap him. Then, without a word, she spun and stalked away. Marcus Hale called later that afternoon. "She's circling the drain," he reported, his voice calm as always. "Core's lawyers are feeding everything to prosecutors. Financial records, wire transfers, even video clips. She's got no allies left." Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, pinching the bridge of his nose. "What's her move?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Honestly, she's out of moves." But Ethan knew Celine better than that. She had one last card, and he knew exactly when she'd play it. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the courthouse just as Celine stepped out of the black SUV, flanked by her legal team. The crowd surged forward, cameras, reporters, protesters, all shouting over one another. Celine wore white. It was a calculated choice. Purity, innocence, vulnerability. Ethan almost smiled. She wasn't going down without one last performance. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Celine's lawyer delivered an impassioned opening. "My client is a grieving daughter. A woman manipulated by a lover she trusted, betrayed by a husband she believed in, blindsided by a father who, in his final days, was confused, sick, and unable to make sound decisions." Ethan watched from the gallery, fingers interlaced, jaw tight. When Core took the stand, though, the cracks widened. "We planned it together," Core said smoothly. "Celine handled the family side. I handled the public side. We were supposed to control the estate." Celine's head snapped up. "You bastard!" she hissed under her breath. The judge's gavel cracked sharply. "Order!" The second surprise came when the hospice nurse stepped forward. Ethan hadn't known about her testimony. "In Mr. Virelli's final weeks," the nurse said gently, "he expressed fear. He was worried about his medications, about visitors late at night. He told me—" She hesitated, voice trembling slightly. "He told me Ethan was the only one he trusted." Celine let out a choked sob. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off, tears streaking mascara down her cheeks. The performance was over. This was real. During a recess, Core slipped out a side door, a dark grin on his face as cameras flashed. But the tide had turned against him, too. LGBTQ+ protesters stood outside, waving signs. "Not in our name, Core Wild. Manipulator, not advocate. You betrayed everyone." Core tried to wave, to charm, but no one reached back. He was done, legally free, socially exiled. Ethan watched it from the window of the courthouse hallway, his reflection staring back at him. He should have felt triumphant. He didn't. Back in the courtroom, Celine's final attempt to save herself was a breakdown. She took the stand, her voice shaking. "I loved my father," she said, tears glistening. "I loved Ethan. I made mistakes. I was weak. I was lost. But I'm not a criminal." But when the prosecution played the intercepted audio messages, late-night calls between Celine and Cor, joking about Alessandro's declining health, strategizing payouts, plotting control, the jury's faces hardened. By the end, even Selena seemed to give up. Her shoulders slumped, her head bowed, and when the judge adjourned for deliberation, she didn't look at Ethan again. That night, back at the mansion, Ethan sat in Alessandro's study with Marcus Hale. The room was quiet, dimly lit. Hope, the old greyhound, lay at Ethan's feet. Marcus poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed one over. "Not the ending you expected, huh?" Ethan huffed a dry laugh. "Not sure what I expected." Marcus leaned back, studying him. "Most people would have burned it all down. You didn't?" Ethan swirled the glass, watching the liquid catch the light. "Didn't want to become them." Marcus clinked his glass against Ethan's. "Good answer." They sat in silence, the weight of months, years, heavy in the air. Finally, Marcus said softly, "Alessandro was proud of you, you know." Ethan's throat tightened. "He told me once," Marcus went on, "you were the only one who knew how to build, not just take." Ethan looked away, blinking hard. "Thanks." Marcus rose, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Get some sleep, Cole. Tomorrow, the verdict comes in." As the door clicked shut behind Marcus, Ethan let out a long breath. He reached down, scratching behind Hope's ears. "We're almost there, girl." The old dog thumped her tail against the floor, eyes half closed. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow it would all be over. The headlines, the cameras, the betrayals, the accusations. For the first time in years, the life ahead of him would be his own. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth all the wreckage left behind. The courthouse was electric. Reporters packed the hallways, photographers waited in clusters outside, and TV vans lined the street, satellite dishes aimed skyward. The morning sun glinted off glass buildings, blindingly bright, as if the city itself wanted a front-row seat. Inside, Ethan Cole stood near the back of the courtroom, his hands folded in front of him. His lawyer had told him he didn't need to come. The verdict would come whether he was here or not. But Ethan needed to see this through. To the left, Celine Varelli sat at the defense table, pale and drawn. Her sleek white suit couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders, the tremble in her hands, the tightness in her jaw. She wore no jewelry, no watch, no wedding ring. She'd come stripped down, as though simplicity might save her now. At her side sat the last of her legal team, the expensive, exhausted attorneys who had spent months trying to keep her empire from collapsing. Cor Wilde was nowhere to be seen. He had been excused from attending after testifying, and paparazzi had caught him 2 nights ago leaving LAX with a new companion, a 24-year-old male model, pretending as if his world hadn't shattered. But the fashion industry had already moved on. His name had been scrubbed from campaigns, partnerships dissolved, shows canceled. He wasn't here for Celine. He never had been. Ethan kept his gaze steady as the jury filed in. 12 people, tight-lipped, eyes forward. The judge entered. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The forewoman stood. "We have, Your Honor." Ethan heard the faint intake of Celine's breath across the room. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant, Celine Varelli, guilty. On the count of elder abuse, we find the defendant, Celine Varelli, guilty. On the count of attempted will tampering, we find the defendant, Celine Varelli, guilty. A hush swept the room. Ethan felt a strange, almost surreal detachment as the words echoed. Not joy, not satisfaction, just quiet. The judge nodded gravely. Sentencing will proceed. Celine's attorney rose, arguing for leniency, painting her as a grieving daughter, manipulated by others under emotional duress. But when Celine herself stood, trying to deliver her own statement, her voice cracked. I only ever wanted to honor my father's legacy, she choked. I was blindsided, betrayed. I never meant... Her voice broke off. The judge, unmoved, delivered the sentence. Celine Varelli, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 15. Celine stumbled back, gripping the table for balance. Ethan saw her eyes flicker toward him, wide and pleading, just for a second. He held her gaze, then looked away. Outside, the media swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. Ethan Cole, do you have a statement? He raised a hand, voice low but clear. No comment. The reporters shouted anyway, but he kept walking, slipping into the back seat of the waiting car. The door closed, muting the chaos. For the first time in years, Ethan exhaled. That night, he sat alone in Alessandro's study, the same study where the first envelope had arrived, where the unraveling had begun. The old house, no, his house, was quiet. Hope, Alessandro's beloved greyhound, lay at his feet, her head resting on his shoe, breathing slow and deep. On the desk lay the final paperwork from the estate lawyers. It was over. Every account, every property, every investment had been transferred. Ethan Cole was now, officially, one of the wealthiest men in Los Angeles. And yet, as he sat there in the darkened room, the weight on his chest didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. It felt like walking through a fire and realizing you were still standing on the other side, but you weren't the same man who'd walked in. A soft knock sounded at the door. Marcus Hale stepped in, casual, a bottle of bourbon in one hand, 2 glasses in the other. Thought you might need this. Ethan offered a faint smile. You always know. They poured 2 fingers each, clinked glasses, and sat. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Marcus exhaled. Hell of a ride. Ethan ran a hand over his face. Yeah. You know, most people, they'd be on a plane to Bora Bora right now, burning through cash, drowning in champagne. Ethan gave a dry laugh. I'm not most people. Marcus smiled. That's why Alessandro left it to you. Ethan fell quiet, staring into the amber liquid. He saw her, Marcus said softly. Long before you did. I should have known. You loved her. Ethan let the words sit. Then, not the person she became. Marcus raised his glass. To the person you became. They drank. The following day, the headlines turned sharper. Celine Varelli, heiress sentenced. Core Wilde, fashion's fallen star. Ethan Cole, the man who survived the empire. But Ethan didn't read them. He was in the garden. The back garden had been Alessandro's favorite place, a space neglected during Celine's reign, overrun with weeds and dying roses. Ethan had spent the last weeks restoring it, bringing in native plants, installing benches, opening it to the foundation's community programs. Today, a small group of scholarship students gathered under the old oak tree. Young architects, engineers, designers, all funded by Alessandro's legacy. Ethan watched from the balcony, coffee in hand, hope at his side. For the first time, the house felt alive. For the first time, it felt like home. That evening, at a small charity event for the foundation, Ethan met Ivy Crane. She was an architectural designer Alessandro had mentored years ago. Sharp, funny, grounded, untouched by the glittering madness of Bel Air. They spoke easily, the conversation flowing in a way Ethan hadn't expected. About design, about community, about what Alessandro had once dreamed of creating. He believed in second chances, Ivy said softly, swirling her wine. Ethan looked at her, a flicker of something warming in his chest. Yeah, he murmured. He did. They walked through the garden after the event, the air cool, the city lights glittering in the distance. Ivy glanced over. You know, you're stronger than people give you credit for. Ethan smiled faintly. I didn't crumble. No, she agreed. You rebuilt. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something unexpected. Hope. Later that night, alone on the balcony, Ethan sat with Hope curled at his feet, the cool breeze lifting his hair, the city humming quietly below. He thought of Celine, in a cell, a name fading from the headlines. He thought of Cor, chasing a spotlight that no longer wanted him. He thought of Alessandro, the man who had seen him when no one else had. And he thought of himself, the man who had stood at the back of the funeral, humiliated, invisible, and had somehow emerged on the other side. Ethan took a long, slow breath. Second chances, he murmured, and in the quiet, he let himself believe, just a little, that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to live again. It had been 3 weeks since Celine Varelli was sentenced. 3 weeks since Cor Wilde's final headline flashed across the screens before vanishing into cultural exile. 3 weeks since Ethan Cole stood in the back of that courtroom, feeling the quiet collapse of the life he'd once known. Now, for the first time, the mansion was truly quiet. Not just silent, but peaceful. The house that had once echoed with Celine's heels, her laughter, her sharp commands, was different now. It wasn't just his house, it was his space, and it was becoming something better. Ethan stood in Alessandro's old study, the morning sun warming the edges of the rug beneath his feet. On the desk were the final foundation papers, the Alessandro Varelli Scholarship Fund, fully endowed and ready to launch. It would pay for underprivileged students, future architects, designers, engineers, to study at top programs. Next to it, a separate file, a formal gift to the Sunset Hills Dog Sanctuary. Ethan reached down, scratching Hope's ears. He'd like this, wouldn't he, girl? The old greyhound wagged her tail softly. A soft knock on the door pulled Ethan from his thoughts. Marcus Hale leaned in, a familiar presence by now. Morning, Marcus greeted, stepping inside. Brought you this. He handed over a small, sealed envelope. Ethan frowned. What's this? Final note from Alessandro. It turned up with the last batch of legal paperwork. Ethan turned it over in his hands, heart tightening as he recognized the bold, slanted handwriting. Ethan, open when it's over. He opened it slowly. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you survived. I hope you're standing in the house, not just owning it. I hope you're walking in the garden, not hiding from it. You were the only one who understood what it meant to build, not just take. I chose you because you chose people. Don't forget that. Now go live your life. Alessandro. Ethan sat heavily in the leather chair, eyes burning. It was a small thing, but it hit deeper than all the court victories combined. That evening, Ethan hosted the first quiet event at the mansion. No cameras, no press, no charity galas stuffed with influencers. Just a small gathering. Scholarship students, mentors, a few foundation partners. Alessandro's vision was finally taking shape, not as a monument to wealth, but as a space of opportunity. Ivy Crane was there, laughing easily with a group of young architects, her dark hair pulled into a loose braid, a simple dress skimming her frame. Ethan found himself drawn to her, not because she dazzled, but because she didn't try to. "You survived," Ivy said softly when they crossed paths on the terrace. Ethan gave a faint smile. "I did." "That's rare, you know," she added, leaning against the railing beside him. "Most people come out of something like this smaller, not bigger." He looked at her, curious. "And what do you think I came out as?" Ivy tilted her head. "Whole." For a long moment they stood together, watching the sun slip below the hills. Later that night, Ethan sat on the balcony, hope stretched at his feet. The city stretched out below, shimmering with 1,000 small lives, all unfolding beyond his view. For years, Ethan had been caught in the orbit of the Varelli name, consumed by its demands, its shadows, its image. But now, as the night wrapped gently around him, he realized something new. He was free, not rich, not powerful, not victorious. Free. The next morning, a news alert flashed on his phone. Celine Varelli, prison interview denied. Core Wild spotted in Berlin nightlife scene. Ethan Cole remains silent. The man who walked away. Ethan smiled faintly, setting the phone aside. He no longer needed to follow their stories. They were over. His wasn't. A week later, Marcus came by one last time. "This is it," Marcus said, setting a final folder on the desk. "We're officially closed. No more investigations. No more loose ends." Ethan shook his hand. "Thank you." Marcus gave a half smile. "You were the only one worth rooting for in all of this, you know." "That's not how it felt." "Doesn't matter how it felt. It's how it ended." Ethan walked him to the door. "Now stay out of trouble," Marcus added with a wink. "I think I've had my fill." The next evening, Ivy stopped by with a bottle of wine. They sat in the garden, the air cool, the stars just beginning to pierce the sky. "You know," Ivy said quietly, "you're allowed to have a life now." Ethan looked at her. "I know." "Do you believe it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." She smiled. "Good." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't feel heavy or empty, just real. In the weeks that followed, the house settled. The scholarship program launched. The dog sanctuary expanded. Ethan kept his old work boots in the garage, not because he needed them, but because he wanted the reminder of where he came from, of what mattered. One afternoon, walking through the garden, Ethan paused near Alessandro's favorite bench. He sat. Hope nudged her head onto his lap. Ethan looked up at the sky, the light shifting through the trees. "Thank you," he murmured. For Alessandro, for the second chance, for the life no one had planned, but somehow he had ended up with. For the first time, the words weren't heavy. They were free. And so was he. The sun hung low over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the city as Ethan Cole stepped out onto the porch of his home. The warm breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine from the garden Alessandro had once tended so carefully. It was a scent Ethan had come to associate with hope and healing, something he never thought he'd feel again until recently. For years, his life had been a battleground, a gauntlet of betrayal and loss so deep that it seemed impossible to emerge unbroken. But standing here now, with hope nestled quietly at his feet and the quiet hum of the city behind him, Ethan understood that he was not just a survivor. He was a man transformed. The final chapter of the turmoil had closed months ago. Celine Virelli sentenced to prison, Core Wild fading into obscurity, and the legacy of Alessandro Virelli firmly in Ethan's hands. But the real victory was far more than legal documents and financial assets. It was in the reclaiming of his spirit, the rebuilding of his family, and the forging of a future on his own terms. He thought of his children, Sophia and Caleb, who had weathered the storm beside him. Their lives, once threatened by the darkness that had consumed their mother and the chaos that had engulfed their world, now brimmed with promise. He had fought relentlessly not just for the fortune that Alessandro had entrusted to him, but for the right to be their father in every sense of the word. Sophia was thriving in school, her passion for environmental science inspiring her teachers and peers alike. Caleb, ever curious and compassionate, had found solace in the dog sanctuary funded through the foundation Ethan had established in honor of Alessandro's wishes. Both children were growing strong, supported by a father who had learned the true meaning of resilience. The house, once a stage for deceit and manipulation, had become a sanctuary. Ethan had overseen its restoration with deliberate care, balancing modern convenience with the warmth and character of its storied past. Every corner reflected not only the legacy he was preserving, but the new beginnings he was creating. His relationship with Ivy Crane had blossomed into something genuine, built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the quiet understanding of two souls who had seen darkness and emerged into light. She was no longer just a friend or a confidant. She was the partner he had long yearned for, someone who saw him, not just the man who had inherited millions, but the man who had rebuilt everything. On this evening, as he watched the sky shift from amber to indigo, Ethan felt the weight of the past settle comfortably behind him. The scars of betrayal and heartbreak were there, etched into his memory, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they were reminders of the strength it took to rise, to fight, and to love again. The door behind him creaked open, and his children bounded onto the porch, their laughter breaking the stillness of the twilight. "Dad, come play with us before dinner," Sophia called, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Ethan smiled, setting aside the glass of water he'd been holding. "All right, but only if Caleb promises not to beat me at chess again." Caleb grinned, already pulling a small chessboard from his backpack. They settled onto the soft grass, the warm earth grounding them in the moment. For a while, there was no worry about legacies, lawsuits, or betrayals. Only the simple joy of family. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Ethan looked up, his heart full. He was home. Final words. This was more than a story about betrayal and fortune. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit, a story of loss and redemption, of a man who refused to be broken, who reclaimed his life with dignity and grace. Ethan Cole was not just the heir to a fortune. He was the master of his fate, the architect of a new legacy, and the embodiment of hope. And as he sat surrounded by those he loved most, he knew one truth above all. Some wounds, no matter how deep, could heal. And from those wounds, something stronger could grow. Life's deepest trials often come disguised as betrayal, loss, and shattered trust. Yet within those dark moments lies the seed of profound transformation. True strength is not measured by the battles won or the wealth amassed, but by the courage to reclaim one's spirit, to rebuild what was broken, and to find peace amid chaos. When faced with deceit and despair, the choice to rise above, not through revenge, but through resilience, reveals the unyielding power of the human heart. This story reminds us that no matter how heavy the wounds, healing is possible. It teaches us about the value of integrity, the importance of family, and the quiet victories that happen away from the spotlight. In embracing second chances and letting go of bitterness, we open ourselves to a future defined not by the past, but by hope, love, and renewal. Thank you for joining this journey of hardship and hope. Your presence here means the world, and your reflections enrich this community. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, Subscribe for more stories that touch the soul, and follow along as we explore the complexities of life, resilience, and redemption together. Until next time, stay strong and keep believing in new beginnings.